Enneagram is about your core motivation. So before we get into it today, it's different than other personality assessments from the standpoint of being about your core motivation and not your behaviors. So that's the difference. And listen along. We hope that you smile, get curious with some questions that you have about yourself, and you might get a little triggered with us along the way, but same, join the club and come along with us on some growth.
For sure. So today we're going to talk about Enneagram types and change. So we'll try to get through all 9 numbers. I know sometimes when we try to get through all 9 numbers, we don't always make it. We'll try today. But before we dive into the 9 types, one of the things that I do is sometimes teach people how to move through the change curve and what that can look like for awareness. So I do just think it's worth touching on that just because we are going to talk about change. If you're familiar with a grief curve, a change curve is very similar, if not identical, to what a grief curve would look like. And the idea behind that is that you move through these different sort of emotional phases as you go through change. And so that's, I think, where we can talk a little bit how each Enneagram type moves through change, what might be happening to them, but also just thinking about those emotions. So when we think about the change curve, it's initially change happens, people are shocked, then they want to deny it, then they're angry, then they're depressed, then they move into kind of this phase that's like experimentation with the change. And then it's integration and full acceptance after that. So that's sort of like the move through the change curve from the emotions that you might experience in change. And not every change, maybe there's like a very positive change that happens. You might not go through the depths of all of the emotions in every single change, but that's the basics.
Yeah. Yeah. It is super interesting to listen to you talk about navigating change from the educator side. I've sat in a couple of change sessions that Holly has done, and it is really helpful to understand kind of the path directionally, and that you can go back and forth on that. Like, it's not static. So I think it ties in really well to this work that we're doing. And I hope to touch on as many of the 9 numbers as we can. But for those of you who have more questions, don't hesitate to DM
Yeah.
or comment.
Email, all the things.
Email, chat, carrier pigeon. I'll take all of it. Okay, so I kind of sprung this topic on Holly about 10 minutes before we started, which is pretty much par for the course. But I think that start with, you got to give yourself a little bit of grace through any sort of change. And to kind of lay the groundwork, we don't mean change as something always really small or really big. It could be anything that's happening. You could have a change to your routine that's going on. You could have a change. My mom's refrigerator broke this weekend. You could be
Yeah.
navigating that as a routine issue, right? So just a reminder that we're not saying that all the changes we're talking about would be like catastrophic. As an example, it could be really small.
When we talk about the emotions that people go through, if we're referring to like extreme emotions, those may only happen in really big significant changes. So if we're
Mhm.
if we're making an example, it's not to say that a small change might cause an extreme emotion in you.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, do you want to start with fives and how I would like to talk about how you experience change? And some of the things that even I think about as I navigate change has a little to do with my center of expression. So it it depends, but feeling first for me, then thinking, then action is a little bit of a relatable topic to it. But I'm curious how a 5, which is called the Investigator, feels change or experiences change.
Yeah. I think there's an element of like we've talked about even with five, there's an element of logic that's sort of the go-to thing to navigate change. So it's like whatever, here's all the logical reasons for whatever the change is. I don't have like a small example that comes to mind, but when we talked about grief in one of the episodes, we talked about, like, I may have mentioned, I can't remember if it was a podcast or if you and I just talked about it. But when my grandma passed away, she passed away in early 2021. It was still like weird COVID time for funerals and all that.